All right, welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I'm sorry we're going to be all steak and no sizzle this week, but we've been having some technical difficulties, and we decided we would rather give you content as opposed to all the bells and whistles. And, of course, we're referring to those of you watching the live show or video show where we have better graphics and et cetera. But anyway, regardless, we're going to be talking the Portland Trail Blazers, falling as none of us expected they would. We're going to be talking how Toronto is maybe making things a series, and we're going to be talking Game of Thrones, and that's probably going to be everything. So anyway, I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, found most places as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, co-host, producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's going on, Dre? God, we got a lot to talk about this week. And, as far as the show itself, I like to think of it as an artistic choice, maybe like the Philip Glass version we've got going for the visuals this week. So, yeah, it'll be good. But, boy, Dre, Game of Thrones is over. Our watch has ended. I don't even know what to think about that. NBA season is almost over, too. What a time.
Yeah, and we'll keep the Game of Thrones spoilers embargoes up until we get to that section. And then, of course, actually, I might want to talk that a little more, too, when we get there, Brian, the whole spoiler culture of television versus movies this day and age. Before we get going, I'll give our promotion. We are sponsored by Sunshower.io. They are a cloud computation company that helps you set up cloud solutions and, more importantly, optimize your cloud solution using their special Anvil optimization engine to ensure you are spending the right amount of money on your cloud solution. So if things like Heroku, Amazon AWS, cloud computation, cloud solutions, if any of those things ring a bell to you and you think you might be spending too much money, go over to sunshower.io/nerd numbers. That lets them know we sent you and helps keep the lights on. All right, on to the show. Actually, Brian, I lied a little bit. Our normal show had two segments that we kind of used regularly. Last Week on Lost, where we would review user comments, and then Around the NBA. In terms of Last Week on Lost, I just wanted to give a thank you. Someone in the YouTube comments actually said they missed regular articles. I agree. The last couple of weeks, I've actually been really sick on the weekends and then have had real work get in the way. We love this show. The show does take priority because, first off, I enjoy it. Second off, it's a lot less work. If we record for an hour, there is an hour podcast all the time, whereas there have been plenty of times I've started an article and I don't get the research done, and that's an hour of work just gone. So we always keep the podcast first and foremost, but I appreciate the comment, even though I don't even have it ready enough to say who to say thank you to. And the other segment was Around the NBA. There was enough tangentially related to NBA news stuff that I figured we'd discuss it. The first is Magic Johnson has kind of come out swinging. I know he went on ESPN a few times and has been talking about his time at the Lakers. He's been throwing Rob Pelinka under the bus, saying some other stuff too. He went out of his way to really fall on the sword for LeBron James. Although one thing that was amusing is he was like, LeBron James, he's just helping all these young players. And what he said is he's made Kuzma better. He's made Ingram better. He's helped out Lonzo Ball. And I was like, I don't know if that's the first thing I'd want to say because Kuzma was horrible this season. Brandon Ingram, I looked this up. This is interesting. I think it is a chemistry issue where Brandon Ingram's shooting numbers got better this season, but his overall production went down. Part of that reason is he was a reasonable assist to turnover ratio player, and that got worse, but I think that probably means with LeBron James in, he handled the ball less. So it's kind of one of those, if you have a player like, say, Klay Thompson, who's good at something, but still not a great player, if you then have other great players come in that can do the things that Klay Thompson could do, you're like, why do we even have this guy? So there is that, but yeah, that has been amusing. And as I mentioned, my Game of Thrones metaphor I've used a few weeks now for Magic Johnson is he was Ned Stark. He was someone that went in to play the Game of Thrones unaware of the kind of lack of honor and all of the backstage politics that went on with it, and just, got beheaded. That's really what happened with Magic Johnson. And that seems to be even more clear as he's coming out. I think you noted this astutely, Brian, that in the real world, in the business world, he is one of the most successful, if not the most successful NBA player post NBA career. And even you could argue Michael Jordan above him, but the key we made about Michael Jordan is Michael Jordan's business success really boils down to him having the Nike portion of his brand, which was he lucked into that, capitalized on it, all the credit in the world. But if we're saying someone who went into business off the bat versus having a head start. Magic Johnson is probably the most successful basketball player in that realm. And then when he came back to the sports world, which we have said forever is not normal. So many aspects of sports politics, of sports management, of sports business, it's just not the normal world. And Magic was just not right for that, which is what we seem to have seen happen.
Yeah, and I haven't caught up on all these, all this palace intrigue yet, as people like to call it. But yeah, I mean, the Lakers, they're trying to rebuild their front office right after Jim Buss didn't do very well there. And yeah, I guess we'll see if Jeannie Buss's new team is Pelinka, Frank Vogel, and we'll see who else. You've got Jason Kidd in there as well. Might be an assistant to Frank Vogel. Yeah. What's going on, Dre?
That was really weird, and I don't know what's going on there at all. What I will say about the Lakers, and we've said this before, it really all comes down to LeBron James's health at this point, and there's still plenty to go. This season, they were so easily close to being a 50-win team with a few things. If Rajon Rondo and LeBron James are 80 to 85% healthy, as opposed to, I think it was probably 60 and 75% respectively on those two in terms of games missed. If that happens, if Kyle Kuzma, Brandon Ingram, and Lonzo Ball, those three players I just mentioned, if they'd had a slightly better progression or health, this team is more than fine. So it's one of these frustrating things where I think I don't recall if we said it on the show, but I noted, I think on Twitter at least, where of all of the things you're going to worry about on this team, about the coaching, about the players, whatever, really the thing that killed them this last season was their health. So this offseason, if they're like, we had major issues last season, we've replaced our medical staff. And I'm not even saying it was the medical staff's fault. I'm just saying it always amuses me when teams have issues. And I don't know if we talked this on the show either, Brian, but actually, yeah, we did, because it was the title of last week's show. But Brett Brown in Philadelphia, where his name is on the hot seat, it's like, of all of the issues to point out about Philadelphia, the coaching is not one I would even worry about at this moment. So the same thing with the Lakers. Of all of the things people are pointing at and being like, oh, thank goodness Magic Johnson's gone, it's like, no, being healthy for next season is really what this team needs to worry about. Also, given the fact that that people are just pointing out, like, they're like, oh, what a garbage trade the Lakers offered for Anthony Davis. If your argument is Magic Johnson and LeBron James came in and wrecked everything, while simultaneously saying all of the young core of players that the Lakers had aren't worth anything, then you don't have a leg to stand on. You're acting as if LeBron James and Magic Johnson came in and wrecked this team that was set to take off, while simultaneously saying this team that was set to take off is not worth Anthony Davis. So, is what it is.
Yeah, that's kind of ludicrous, and it sounds like Anthony Davis is still demanding a trade, even after they won the Zion Williamson lottery sweepstakes, and on top of that, there's also reporting that they are still refusing to trade with Los Angeles because they scuttled, the relationship, basically, they think. So it sounds really petty, and it's really hard for me to say one person or another deserves blame within the Lakers. But really their offseason is going to come down to what I think GM LeBron can accomplish in his recruiting, right?
But to be fair, let's point out that pettiness and annoyance. So, one, I know the Spurs were anti trading with the Lakers, and while they ended up okay, I'm curious, and I think we even said if they couldn't get anything else for Kawhi, we actually approve the move they made, meaning productive players trump future draft picks in the NBA. I don't necessarily think that was the best trade they could have made. For instance, I would have loved to have seen Lonzo Ball in San Antonio to see what Popovich could have done with him. But regardless, the Spurs did not want to trade away Kawhi. We don't quite know what happened with Paul George, but everybody thought it was a foregone conclusion that he didn't. And then, of course, the Lakers really wanted Anthony Davis. So when you're saying what LeBron James can do for recruitment, there are at least two players, both Kawhi and Anthony Davis, that we think really, really wanted to go to the Lakers, and that other teams actively worked really hard to stop them from. And then now we're saying, well, what is the team doing? And I think that we joke about this being the sponsor plug, the Sunshare.io, because they optimize, cloud computation, server configurations, etc. The NBA giving so much power, let's get political for a second, Brian, kind of electoral college based, giving so much power to small market teams actually hurts their brand. And this is something I'll give American Numbers on Twitter, that's Arturo Galletti, that he was talking about. Zion Williamson going to New Orleans is probably millions of dollars in lost revenue for the NBA in terms of where to properly place a star, well as being millions of dollars in lost revenue to Zion Williamson's brand himself. When people are like, oh my goodness, can you believe Anthony Davis still doesn't want to stick around even with Zion there? It's going, Anthony Davis's complaints probably are not based on the idea that this team can win. They are probably based on the fact that New Orleans is a horrible market, and if Anthony Davis wants to maximize his brand, he wants to get out. And we have seen this happen with, if we look at that amazing draft class of 2003 with LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, all of them eventually were like, LeBron James and Carmelo at the very least were like, get me off this horrible market team and get me into a good market. And that is so much more important for their brand. So with Anthony Davis going, oh my goodness, doesn't he want to win? It's like, no, as a professional athlete, we're always behind he's trying to maximize his brand and maximize his earning.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if he does want to win, depending on a rookie like Zion Williamson, even though, he might be the best rookie prospect in 10 years or whatever, or since Anthony Davis himself, who knows, you still can't depend on that, right? So even if Zion Williamson pans out for them, they still are probably not going to be able to compete in the West next year. I mean, who knows? But and then there's another factor, which is the ownership of the Pelicans may not be in a great situation either. And it seems like, Anthony Davis and his the people that work for him, his representation probably don't have a great relationship with them either. So it seems clear that this relationship has been, falling apart for a long time.
Well, I did want to say what's funny about the Pelicans, even if you assume that Zion is going to come in and be the next, basically Ben Simmons would be the kind of mark we're looking for.
Still probably not enough.
And what's funny is I noted that and someone's like, well, a talent of that caliber, Ben Simmons, Chris Paul, Tim Duncan, Shaq, right? They're like once a decade, and we've seen ours for the decade, right? So, we don't know. And then also Ben Simmons wasn't a real, I actually agree with this take. So agreeing with Donovan Mitchell in the sense that I do think that Ben Simmons getting a year to train with the Philadelphia 76ers, interact with a real NBA team. Essentially, Ben Simmons getting a year-long internship with an NBA team had to have been much better for his progression than going back to school for a year. So, I mean, the point when Donovan Mitchell was making the bullshit claim that Ben Simmons did not deserve Rookie of the Year, the reason I want to state that it's bullshit is that the rules make a very explicit set of criteria. And we have already seen precursors. So 2 examples I'll give you are Larry Bird and Blake Griffin. These are 2 players in NBA history that have both won Rookie of the Year. Larry Bird, as a reminder, went back to school for a 5th year. And Blake Griffin, same situation as Ben Simmons, was out his rookie year and then played his sophomore season as a rookie. So the NBA already has a precedent for that set of rules saying, this is the criteria that makes you a rookie. And I know like baseball has weird things too, where like if you've played so many games, you don't count as a rookie. So there's a weird scenario where like if you played 2 games, you don't get to count as a rookie the next year, whatever. So that claim was bullshit, that he didn't deserve Rookie of the Year. Now the claim though that being with an NBA team for a season probably helped development a lot more than college is true. And so Zion isn't even getting that. But let's assume Zion matches Ben Simmons. If you lose Anthony Davis, not only are you already back to where you were last season, you might even be a little ahead because don't forget, we think, and let's see, because I know, let's see, remind me, Brian, because refresher, Anthony Davis got shut down, kind of. This was really amusing, and I actually do realize we have to talk a piece that I wrote this season. We have to just revisit it, and then we'll revisit it some more. But Anthony Davis still managed to put up 14 wins produced last season, despite the fact that he didn't play full minutes towards the end of the season. And that still places him in top 15 in the NBA easily, if not top 10. He's 6, 9. Yeah, he was top 10 in the NBA this past season, despite only, I'll put in quotes, playing 1,850 minutes in 56 games. So that, losing that player means no matter, even if Zion Williamson is the next Tim Duncan, they're still a worse team than they were last season, and we can't fault that. Also, I wrote a piece this season about how the NBA screwed itself and how they changed the rules for the draft lottery. As a reminder, the way the draft lottery works is if you are a losing team, you are entered into a lottery based on your win-loss record, where the worst win-loss record gets more lottery balls, the best win-loss record gets fewer, and it's capped out at 25%, or it used to be, such that it was still a bad idea to tank an entire season because your odds were severely low, but teams were still doing it. Back in the day, the Bobcats were willing to give up, I believe Bobcats or Hornets or whatever the Charlotte team's called now, was willing to give up a full NBA season in the hopes of getting Anthony Davis, and they missed out. The NBA reduced that so that the top 3 teams were at 14%. In theory, saying, hey, don't give up a full season. But what they did by doing that is they smoothed everything in the middle, saying, if your NBA season is over, as in your star Anthony Davis has decided he doesn't want to play for you anymore and is going to shut it down, or, he shut himself down before the trade deadline, you tried to trade him, didn't trade him, now you're out of the playoffs, you have a star that doesn't want to play for you and wants to leave next season, and you don't want him to get injured because you want to keep his trade value up, or most of your team, LeBron James, Rajon Rondo, who else? There was at least one other player, Lonzo Ball, I think one other player got injured on that team this season. On the Lakers, you have two teams like that are hurt for the playoffs. Should they start shutting things down to try and up their lottery balls? The New Orleans Pelicans and the Los Angeles Lakers both finished top 5 in the NBA draft doing just that, meaning that we're already seeing repercussions of this rule. I said this was a horrible rule. This was a horrible thing to do. And 2 teams have benefited from it, and 1 team is horrible, right? The New Orleans Pelicans winning the draft when the Los Angeles Lakers, the Chicago Bulls, and the New York Knicks were in the market, right? The Chicago Bulls or New York getting Zion is huge for the NBA. New Orleans Pelicans, we've already seen how they fucked it up with 2 stars. That's Chris Paul and Anthony Davis. We're giving them a third. It's ridiculous.
Well, let me put some nuance onto that comment. So, yes, the rule is not achieving what I think the NBA wanted to achieve, at least nominally, which is to prevent tanking by these teams. Your argument that it may have encouraged it is probably right, and we're seeing the repercussions. But if for what we want, as the outsiders, right, we're okay with these high lottery teams doing better than the low lottery teams, right? Because we don't want we want the bad teams to not be rewarded. I'm saying double negatives here, but you know what I'm trying to say, right?
I honestly don't.
Oh no, so I mean, if you put markets aside, right? Clearly, we want, we think economically speaking, the league should want New York and Chicago to be better. But if we talk about it in terms of competence, right? This idea of rewarding the worst front offices with the best players and making those best players go there, it's probably good for the higher lottery teams to have better odds. So anyway, the lottery is dumb to begin with, and I can't say this enough. It's a scam. It's just a scam.
It is. My entire point and remains this is that when you hurt the quality of your product, and we as sports fans hate that, is where it's a problem. And the NBA is giving very clear incentives for teams that are just out of the playoffs with no hope of getting in to play worse, which is not good for the fans, as well as still keeping around the stupid incentive to be willing to tank. So it's a worse product that also misallocates resources, which we don't like. So again, the lottery is just stupid, and what bugs me is all of these fixes people want to do to the draft lottery, and for what it's worth, we might release a paper about our thoughts on that too, where I would probably start with get rid of the draft as my first solution, but if you refuse to do that, here's how I would improve it. That being said, all of these fixes to the draft essentially just move the problem around. That's what we hate. And we'll definitely talk more about the draft lottery as we get closer to it. I did want to say, just to that note, I just started seeing rumblings of this, which is rough, with Tobias Harris. What are the 76ers going to do with Tobias Harris? My opinion is with how Jimmy Butler has played, you just give him a 4-year contract and have a smart...
Him being Butler or Harris?
Butler. I thought it was Butler. But with Jimmy Butler, you just give Butler the money, and you accept that even if he follows a Chris Paul route or a couple other Dwayne Wade route, right, declines in a few years, you move him then, and you can. I've been amazed. Like Dwayne Wade is an example. you can move stars. It's, even underwhelming stars, you can find a way to move them. So that's my opinion on Jimmy Butler. Tobias Harris, though, we kind of had upside on when he was younger. Said maybe he's getting played out of position of the 4. We still think that. He did not play well in the playoffs and did not play spectacularly well for the 76ers. So I'm kind of of the opinion you cannot give Tobias Harris the money if you're the 76ers, and you just need to let him walk.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I have not looked into their salary cap situation at all, so I'm scrambling to get Spotrac up and whatnot. But here's like my knee-jerk reaction is just to talk about, this high-level Moneyball style roster building philosophy that we believe in, right? Which is, you invest a lot of money in the stars. They need to be real stars, though. They need to be in the good positions. Don't overpay bad players, right? So anyway, what's the 76ers situation? So if you're trying to win an NBA title, you're really going to pay a lot of money to like 3 players, right? That's kind of the amount you can really pay a lot of money to. Like for the Warriors, they have Durant and Curry, and then a couple of other guys not quite making that much. But if they wanted to, they could max out 3 players, right? So for the 76ers, I think that's clearly Embiid, Simmons, and Butler, right? Those are their 3 best guys. And you say, okay, we want Tobias Harris. Maybe he's really good. Well, if what you're saying is right, that he's going to be looking for a max-style deal, the 76ers just have to say, well, that doesn't fit into our plan, right? You're not one of our top 3 guys. We just can't afford to pay you top 3 money, so you've got to go. I think it's that simple.
Yeah, and I mean, the player I would compare him to is DeMarcus Cousins. Like DeMarcus Cousins back in the day when the Kings re-upped him and we were like, I'm not sure about this guy. We thought he was a good draft pick for what it's worth, and we thought the risk the Pelicans took on him was worth it, and we thought the money that the Warriors paid him this last season were all worth it. But it's like when you've got to give a player a max contract, this is like Carmelo Anthony, DeMarcus Cousins, now Tobias Harris, and they just haven't shown it, you just have to move on. Last thing, I just want to kind of give a shout out and overall commentary. The Athletic is hiring a bunch of new writers to cover the WNBA, which is fantastic, including some people that we like.
Season's starting in a few days, right?
The Davidson, and yeah, I need to get off my butt and work on some stuff for that too for Dave Barry. But anyway, that is awesome, and we enjoy it. There's been some weird rumblings around the internet that's kind of where people are starting to comment on the fact that a majority of these women or writers are women, and kind of coming to like, well, shouldn't we do this for sports writing for women, and should they cover other sports? And the only comment I want to give is that if you are silent about the treatment of women representation in sports and sports media until it is when a bunch of women get jobs to write, then I give your take very little substance. And like one of the people, it's a rough part because I really do enjoy him as a writer, Jeff Pearlman. But, the same thing, and by the way, we've got to be in the same boat for some people, right, Brian? They're like, oh, man, I love these Wages of Wins people, their takes on Carmelo Anthony and Donovan Mitchell being overrated, and I get on my soapbox and say Donald Trump's a horrible president, and they're like, wait, how do you listen to that? Same boat, but like Jeff Pearlman, a lot of times when he comes out on like social issues, I'm like, oh, dear God, shut up. Because he came out and he was like, they're pigeonholing these women and da-da-da-da. It's like, if I saw you regularly complain, and I do not believe this is the case with Jeff Pearlman, about treating women well in sports media, I might give this take some nuance. But if the only time your head pops up is when some writers are hired to write about the WNBA, then it's very telling. And we've kind of noticed these weird implicit biases that happen in sexism and racism, where you go, when you notice everybody stepping up at the same time to say it's okay for one group of people but not another, or vice versa, is when you kind of tilt your head and say this doesn't seem right. So those are my 2 takes. Fantastic job. Congratulations. Awesome on The Athletic for doing that. Awesome on WNBA coverage. There is definitely a need for that. Oh, by the way, last point, Brian, this preamble where I said we were just going to have a quick start of the show before getting to the playoffs, and now it's turned into a very long segment. Fuck Forbes yet again.
Is that saga the same saga here?
Dave Barry tweeted to me or texted me about it, and then I tweeted about it. A recent article came up about, I forget who, if it was Kevin Durant or someone. I don't remember in depth, and I'm not giving them the link juice. They're not even getting a link. But the writer noted the overpaid, underpaid methodology, and he said Forbes is indebted for Dave Barry's contribution on this model, is what the writer said in his article, which means he was probably edited by the same editor that used to edit Dave Barry. As a reminder, Dave Barry was fired by Forbes because he wrote an article saying the NBA was underpaying WNBA athletes and used it in comparison to G League pay, noticing the comparison of max G League salaries to max WNBA pay. A max G League player was getting more money than the max players in the WNBA, and that was bullshit to start off. And then when we examine the revenue models of the WNBA, if they paid on a similar scale as the NBA, that they are basically paying their athletes half to a third as much as their respective NBA athletes. And as an example, because I know this, I know it's probably not going to matter to the people that are already bristling up, Brian, but I figure we should explain this math. People will say the WNBA doesn't pull in as much money as the NBA. A better way to put it is, if the NBA makes $100 and the WNBA makes $1, if that's the measure we're putting, the NBA gives $50 to their players. That's what the NBA does if we're saying 100 to 1. The WNBA, then, we're saying if they just did the same thing the NBA does, they should give 50 cents to their players. And they give closer to 20 to 25 cents from what we are able to glean. That is the complaint we have had about the WNBA, and Dave Barry has had, and the NBA complained to Forbes, and then Forbes let Dave Barry go over this very argument. So Forbes, though, has insisted, and I've got to say, this seems very petty, and I've got to buy it's the same editor that edited Dave, because he has also written some articles. That editor has written some articles about overpaid and underpaid using Dave Barry's methodology. And this recent article that came out similarly saying we're indebted to Dave Barry. And Dave says Forbes seems to be really insistent on using his work and models that he did for Forbes and making it appear as if Dave is approving these articles despite the fact that they fired him very recently. So I think that is kind of a bullshit maneuver. And, fuck you, Forbes, for that. So I've got that out there again, Brian. We can get on to the playoffs unless you want to give a capper.
No, I'm not familiar with that situation, so let's keep going.
Brian stays political. All right, let's get to Golden State Portland to start, Brian. It was closer than it appeared, to be honest, although it follows up a point that I love. So to rehash something we've said before, this is an Arturo Galletti thing. Arturo has looked at the distribution of point margins, meaning how much teams outscore and or outscored by their opponent in NBA. And so that's a bell curve. We would expect that. And he has said, if we observe this distribution, what we have seen in recent years is that based on the quality of teams, this distribution has not moved as much as it should have, meaning teams should be both blowing weaker opponents out by more than they are, and teams should be keeping, and games shouldn't be as close as they are on both tail ends of the curve. It's basically, and he says it appears artificially constrained about the 10-point mark, because his theory, his hypothesis is that coaches and teams get in their head a 10-point lead being insurmountable in the fourth, and that's when they let up off the gas on games. And the reason I've loved this is that there have been some smart teams, including Arturo's own Boston Celtics. Last season, Boston had a ton, and by last season I don't mean 2019, I mean the 2017-2018 season. Boston was this scrappy team that just seemed to always pull out these comebacks, and that's part of what made them the best team in the East. And in this conference finals between Portland and Golden State, I gotta give a shout out to Richard Jefferson, former great Golden State Warrior player, Brian. He 3 days in a row tweeted, right, Portland is up by 17, but it's 50-50 if they hold this lead. He tweeted that 3 games in a row, and Portland gave up a 17-point lead, Brian, 3 separate times. We have explained the math on this, though, by the way. If you look at the NBA, the average NBA game is 100 possessions a team, meaning each team gets roughly 100 attempts to score a basket. And the average team scores about a point a basket, so this explains it, right? Most games are near 100 to 100 points. That's the typical math.
This series ended up 96.1, but yeah, very close.
But say, I mean, to that point, that stays it. So I mean, 96.1, right, divided by 4 is 24. That's 24 possessions a quarter. A 17-point lead in the modern NBA with the 3-point line is 6 possessions. If you get a stop and a 3, a stop and a 3, a stop and a 3, if you can do that a total of 6 times in a quarter. And it doesn't have to be contiguous either, right? So I'm saying you have 2 teams with 24 possessions each in a quarter. if you're able to basically kill one of their possessions and get a 3 on one of your possessions and tick that 6 of the boxes while keeping all of the other possessions the same. If you're viewing this kind of like a, I'm forgetting the type of golf. My golf knowledge comes from Mario Golf, Brian, so I apologize. But there is a form of golf in Mario that I think is a real tournament where you're playing one-on-one against another opponent, and you're just trying to win a hole, and whoever wins the most holes first wins.
Oh, yeah, match play, I think they call it golf. But, yeah, they have it in a lot of sports, yeah.
All right, so I've loved match. But, I mean, essentially, if we're saying the fourth quarter is a 24-possession match play where you have 24 holes, right? If the Portland Trailblazers match the Golden State Warriors on 18 of those, and then the Golden State Warriors manage to win 3-0 on 6 of those possessions, they can win the quarter. And as we notice, that's only 1/4 of the possessions in a quarter. That is trivially easy to do if you think about it, right? So it's not insurmountable. So that to me is the key, and I'm really glad that the Golden State Warriors managed to do that, but also amused, right? That basically a 17-point lead in the NBA Conference Finals was not safe.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this series was closer than 4-0. I think. It's funny. Portland. Some people were saying this today, and I think it's true. They really kind of overachieved, right? They probably shouldn't have beaten the Nuggets. They probably shouldn't have made it to the Western Conference Finals. Like, I mean, they played well enough. They deserve it, right? But like, they played above their actual skill level. Their players just were nowhere close to being as good as Golden State's, even with all these guys hurt, right? So, it's easy for me to say that, I guess, as a Golden State fan, but
as a reminder. So there are a lot of things to go over. As a reminder, examining last round of the playoffs, every team that advanced was the correct team based purely on the players they played and their regular season wins produced numbers. Meaning if we just looked at the production of all the players in the playoffs and how they played last round, every matchup ended as it's supposed to, including, as I said, I was amazed by this, the Toronto Raptors, Philadelphia 76ers. Their matchup was razor thin based on their regular season numbers, and that's exactly how it ended out, right? A buzzer beater from Kawhi to win in Game 7. So that's fine. So the Portland Trailblazers were, in theory, supposed to beat the Nuggets based on based on the players they played. You could probably throw in some home court away, whatever, but they were easily the weakest team advancing into the conference finals. They were not supposed to compete with the Warriors. And you know this, even doing the exact same exercise I just did, which is just say, take Kevin Durant off the board and replace him with an amalgamation of the bench players that you would have to play. I think Kevon Looney primarily, right?
He was amazing.
Some of the other players, they were not supposed to win. So that is definitely true. That being said, one thing they did is Enes Kanter, we said this ahead of time. One thing that screwed the Nuggets is Enes Kanter played a lot of minutes against the Nuggets and played very well, including a great Game 7. Screw you, Enes Kanter. Screw you, New York Knicks. Because the New York Knicks waived Enes Kanter, which let him go to Portland. And then as you're noting, Brian, it was a weird just set of bounces that bounced the Portland Trailblazers into the exact right spot. I had said the same thing at the Nuggets. The Nuggets being in the number 2 seed was the best case scenario for a non-top 3 team. Those top 3 teams being, I would argue, Toronto, Milwaukee, Golden State. So those 3 teams, you're like, they're the top. They should be where they're supposed to be. But barring those 3 teams, I was like, the Nuggets got the most favorable drawing because I'm also including home court. And despite that, they still lost. So we're agreeing. Portland got a very favorable playoff draw, which got them into the conference finals. They had no business competing. That being said, they did shut down Enes Kanter after Game 3 and weren't even playing him as much. So it's kind of one of these funny things where, and by the way, lo and behold, they were out-rebounded by 20 by the Golden State Warriors overall in that series. So it's a funny one where they had no business being there. We even noticed that even with the lead, the Golden State Warriors were strong enough to do the very easy exercise, as I said, which is to basically, in fourth quarter match play, win 6 possessions via 3. That's what the Golden State Warriors had to do, and that's what they did. All that being said, they hurt themselves by not playing Enes Kanter, and even Jeremy Britton, I'd say penultimate. I'm going to give you Ultimate Warriors fan. I'm going to give Jeremy Britton penultimate Warriors fan. So... and you guys can fight it out as to who should win. Despite that, they made it harder on themselves not playing Enes Kanter. And Jeremy asked me, he's like, why? He's like, why do people hate Enes Kanter? What is it about him? And, it is this very weird thing of people going, I hate how this player looks on post-up defense, ergo they must be a bad player.
Yeah.
And that's bizarre because when you look at his shooting efficiency numbers, his rebounding numbers, his other numbers, he's a very good player. And that one portion of the game, post-up defense, is only one part of the game. And I remember, Patrick said this about Kevin Love. He's like, yeah, Kevin Love isn't a great post-up defender, but he's great at other forms of defense. So ideally what a team should do if you have Kevin Love is try and minimize the number of post-up defensive plays he has to do and maximize all of his other things. So it is bizarre, especially I think with Myers Leonard and who's the other big on the
Zach Collins.
Zach Collins. It's like, let them do the post-ups. Let Enes Kanter do all the other stuff, and you should be fine. And there was this brief window, by the way, with the freaking Oklahoma City Thunder with Steven Adams and Enes Kanter playing together, and everybody was like, see, they're amazing together. And I was like, I thought Enes Kanter sucked at D. And they're like, well, he doesn't suck at D if you play him next to Steven Adams. It's like, then do that. It's a freaking team sport, and if a player can't do everything, you don't have him do it. You don't have Rudy Gobert dribble the ball up the court and pass because that's not his job. You have another player do that, and you have Rudy Gobert do all the stuff he's good at.
Yeah, I mean, and this just gets back to the, how do you win a basketball game using Moneyball, right, that we always talk about. So, there aren't really too many perfect players in the NBA. It's like Giannis and LeBron maybe, that's it, maybe a few others. So all these players you're talking about are going to have strengths and weaknesses, right? So maybe Kanter has some weaknesses on defense. But here's what I zeroed in on from what you said. Portland lost rebounding by 20, and Kanter is a good rebounder, so you can't just get destroyed on the boards and then say we're just not going to play Kanter.
And it confuses me too, because what's going to happen, right, is Kanter's going to look silly on D against some player on the Warriors, right? He's going to end up in a matchup against Draymond Green or Klay Thompson or heaven help him, Steph Curry, and look bad, and they're like, you suck at D, let's sit you down. And I've seen so many teams do that where they're like, oh my goodness, this player sucks at D, let's sit him down. And then you watch James Harden or Steph Curry or Draymond Green or Kevin Durant, more accurately, torch him, and it's like, oh, congratulations. You were mad this team couldn't win a defensive matchup in a sport where the stars usually win the matchup.
Yep.
And then this is the Brian Binns of productivity. Remind us, is very similar to Dean Oliver's 4 factors.
Yep.
Brian, when he talks about the NBA, always talks about looking at different areas where you want to maximize productivity. In an ideal world, very much like sunshower.io, you would maximize all of the bins perfectly. And this, for the record, one of the teams, the sunshower.io team of the decade, I'm going to give to the 2008 Boston Celtics, because this was a team that had the stereotypical point guard in Rajon Rondo, the stereotypical shooting guard in Ray Allen, the stereotypical versatile forward in Paul Pierce, the stereotypical defensive power forward in Kevin Garnett, the stereotypical, remember back when he was good, Kendrick Perkins, center and Kendrick Perkins? This team was like the most classical textbook Wikipedia definition of each position player. And they were, a 67-win team somewhere near there. And then, they had James Posey as their sixth man, who's a perfect sixth man. So it's like that team did the maximize Brian Binns of productivity perfectly. And that's really what you want to go for. So it's really funny when a team like that goes like, well, Rajon Rondo is really not good at shooting threes, we should bench him. And you go, well, then what the fuck do you have Ray Allen and Paul Pierce for? So here's what it is. You had a few other notes. You said that Damian Lillard's expected to sign a Supermax deal. We fully agree with that. Just, take threes. And then that Terry Stotts is coming back. I think this is good, and I think the importance is showing the funny part about how the NBA playoffs impact teams, which is, you are right. The Portland Trailblazers overperformed in this playoffs, and that's fine. We don't lament them at all. It was lucky bounces and all that. Fine. And the team goes, we overperformed, so we're going to be very happy with our team and keep it together and keep trying. Whereas we've seen teams that are very good teams, and they don't even really underperform. As in, they go into the playoffs, they lose to a team they're supposed to, but then their management gets upset and tries to move everything around and shake everything up.
Houston Rockets is a big example, right?
Rockets are a classic example of this, where you just go, your team wasn't healthy, just get healthy next season and go forward and you're fine. And they've done that repeatedly in their history. So it's kind of the point of going, good on the Portland Trailblazers, and try and be more like the Portland Trailblazers going forward, which is, if your team's going good and there aren't major upgrades you can do, keep it together and keep going.
Yeah, I love that point. Even though I'm sitting here bad-mouthing the Portland Trailblazers, I do love these moves. Lillard is clearly one of the best point guards. That he loves being there in Portland, and that they should sign him to a supermax. And if he's definitely going to be your guy. And if he likes Terry Stotts, then sure, keep Terry Stotts around for him. If they think and let's look at what a coach does. If we think their roster is not that good, but they're still, playing hard on defense and getting past these better teams. Maybe part of that is Terry Stotts, getting the most out of his players. So, yeah. Although I do need to rip him a little bit for bullying the reporter after Game 6 or whatever it was. Did you see that? He was totally wrong about what he said there, but that's okay.
So what happened? Recap, because I don't remember this. I didn't see it. I have obviously not paid that much attention to this series, despite the fact that it has been very up and down, with these close 17-point losses. But anyway, Brian, what happened there?
So there was a game where, I think it was Game 6, was the one where Curry went off for like 23 points in the fourth quarter or whatever, right? Maybe this game... now I'm getting the games all screwed up. Anyway, one of the most recent games, and the series only went to 4, right? So clearly I'm using the wrong numbers here, but we remember that game. He decided to sag off the pick and rolls, right? To not double up on Curry, and he just got all these open threes, right? And the reporter is like, well, why did you do that? And he said, oh, well, he torched this other team using the blitz, double team him strategy. So clearly you're stupid for suggesting that, is basically what he told this reporter. And it's like, come on, it's not an all or nothing thing with coaching. You can try different looks, you can do different things. So just to bully the reporter for asking a valid question, I thought was dumb.
Yeah, and we want to keep this point. We've made it before, and we've said we're starting to take like a hard line against like Popovich. But this notion of a reporter's job is to ask you questions, and a lot of these are innocuous and they're very straightforward. And it's very frustrating when coaches decide to act as if it's like some offensive thing that you were going to ask about the game you just asked about. I did want to give one other shout out. This was an interesting argument I was having back and forth with American Numbers, Arturo, on Twitter about the 2016-2017 Warriors, because there's this very interesting pervasive myth that's happening now, because you guys just put out the Portland Trailblazers with no work right, about Kevin Durant's value to this franchise. And Arturo was saying, even with no Kevin Durant, the Warriors probably still have 1.5 more rings, which is an interesting take. And one of the things that frustrated me about this, because he said they still probably win a ring in 2016, 2017. I actually do want to give that team an amazing amount of credit, because that team had an 11.35 SRS, which is the best modern day normal 3-point line SRS in NBA history. So, reminder, SRS is strength of schedule adjusted point margin, meaning that Warriors team on a neutral court would be expected to beat an average team by 11.35 points a game, which is ridiculous. And then, of course, the teams that used to do it were in the 70s, back in the day when like the ABA was around, so talent was dispersed, or the Bulls who did it 96, and they did it with a shortened 3. So this is the best team in NBA history. I'm going to say the 2016-2017 Warriors are the best team in NBA history right now. That's the bar to beat. And as a reminder, they went 16-1 in the NBA playoffs too. So this is a ridiculously good team. But a reminder of what happened, they played a 61-win San Antonio Spurs team who lost Kawhi Leonard in the first game, and they were up when they lost Kawhi in that game to go on and win 4-0. So I was kind of going, it's ridiculous to assume this team is just going to win an NBA title first off, because they'd have to still beat that Kawhi San Antonio Spurs. But even looking at their numbers, if you had chopped their numbers in half, meaning you took that team and instead of being 11.35, they're like a 5.7 team, that is still the third best team in the NBA that season. That is how good that team was. Where you could argue Kevin Durant, finals MVP Kevin Durant, you could argue he was half of their production, which we don't think he was that season. You could remove him entirely. You could Thanos him, right? You could, snap your finger and remove Kevin Durant from that team. And that team was still a very favorable chance to win an NBA Finals. Now, again, the two things that I think are annoying in that assumption that Arturo was making is, one, that Kawhi gets injured in the playoffs. There's nothing that says that happened. And two, everybody keeps going with this Curry is better than Durant. And what's frustrating is Curry has his entire career had some lingering injury concerns, and I think the last 3 seasons has missed, 15 games a season at least? Am I mistaken on that, Brian?
Yeah, that sounds about right, but I'm not sure.
So in that season, in 2016-2017, Steph Curry played more minutes than Kevin Durant. The only time in their career together, when they're on the team together, that has happened. But, and yeah, he played 79 games, and as a reminder, the last 2 seasons, 51 games in 69. So this assumption that Steph Curry in that universe stays healthy, that the Warriors don't resign Harrison Barnes, because that was the plan initially, I believe, and that Kawhi gets injured, just assuming that all 3 of those things happen, meaning the Warriors still win a title, I think are off. But I will still say the take of, holy cow, the 2016-2017 Warriors might not even have needed Kevin Durant to win a title is apt and amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, and we've been going back to this a lot lately, but this is Patrick's point about the Durant signing, is just the depth it gives you. You know, of course you want to play Curry and Durant together. That's incredible. But having them both allows one of them to go down and still, you know, give the team a chance to win a title. So that's the big reason for it, and we've seen that happen, right? They're still just loaded even without Durant.
Yeah, I call it the spare tire principle, and it's funny because it's the same thing where I made a tweet about this, and the point I made is you don't say to yourself, hey, I don't need my regular tire because you have a blowout on the highway and you put your spare tire on and are still able to drive for the day. Or conversely, let's say you're lucky and you drive and your spare tire is never needed, and you go, I never needed that spare tire. That is ludicrous thinking to have. And so we're at the same point with the Warriors. I think you summed it up best where you said, it looks like Kevin Durant is out the door. Although I really wonder what a third Finals MVP does to that, Brian.
Who knows?
But I really, if you think Curry's out the door, you kind of want to convince yourself that it's all going to be okay. But I really, really hate these takes of Curry is better than Durant. For what it's worth, here's the funny note. Permanent basis, we agree Steph Curry has been the best player on the Warriors the last 4 seasons. We agree with that. Or the last 3 seasons with both, right? We agree with that take. But it's dumb when you have 2 players that are this good and this close together to try and be picking favorites, especially when the specialness, this Warriors team is freaking special, right? I just said 2016-2017 is the greatest modern-day NBA single-season team. Fuck the 86 Celtics. They're right out. Greatest individual season team is that team. Any team that comes on, when I think Kobe and Shaq were coming in saying, our Lakers could have won. I think when Pippen was coming out, our Bulls could have won. No. 2016, 2017 Warriors, greatest single season NBA team ever. Full stop, lock it in. It's really bizarre to see people try and explain why, despite the fact that there's a lot of shared credit deserved on that team, to try and say it was all Curry or not. And I think that's just the NBA mentality.
It is, and here's what I think it's all about. And first of all, I do agree that that 16-17 team was probably the best. I actually like the talent on the roster for this Warriors team better than that year, but because of the injuries this year, they didn't produce as much, right? So we have to say that was the best team, I think. But yeah, in terms of the fan mentality, here's what it's all about. So if we establish all these different facts, and I'm not saying they're all true, but I just think the people with this mentality think they're true, which is, number one, Durant is definitely on his way out. Number two, the reason he's definitely on his way out is because of this idea in the NBA, amongst fans anyway, maybe it's amongst coaches and players too, I don't really know, is that there has to be one player on the team that's the man, right? That the offense is the center of them, they get to be the leader or whatever. And so this fan line of thinking goes that it wasn't sustainable to have Durant and Curry together because one of them has to be the man, so therefore we can only keep one of them. Like that's just the framework they're living in, right? We just can't have both of them, it's not sustainable, so we have to pick one, we're forced to. And so because of that, they get into all these off-the-court factors and style factors that aren't just based on pure numbers, right? And we talked about this before. Oh, Curry is more of the quote-unquote homegrown guy. He's not a mercenary. We like his style of play more. It's more of a Warriors style, not this Durant isolation style. So there's all these other things that go into it other than just wanting the team to win, basically, which is what I want. But that's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, sorry, and I'm already getting my head in the Bucks game. It's just, I wish I could know on Durant, and I just can't see any problem, right? If Durant gets 2 Finals MVPs with the Warriors, and that's all that he gets out of this excursion with them, and plays the rest of his career fine, adding to his regular season totals, he's already an MVP, he's already a first ballot Hall of Famer. It's very rough to try and say what a player should do. We were talking about Anthony Davis at the top of the show about there are lots of things you're trying to maximize in a career. Regular season success, to also go with money-making potential. So knowing what Kevin Durant wants is really, really hard. And trying to even gauge the mentality, that's the hard part, right? Is he's only 30, right? He just turned 30 this season, I believe. I think him and Curry are both 30.
That's correct.
And that was the thing I looked up is, how often in NBA history do you get 2 great players that close to each other in age on a team together? Because usually when you have 2 MVP caliber players on a team together at the same time, it either goes up in flames. This is Penny Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal. This is the fault of the Oklahoma City Thunder, for what it's worth, with Westbrook, Durant, and Harden. Or it's a passing of the torch, meaning like Kareem to Magic or Oscar Robertson to Kareem. On their respective teams. This just does not happen, and it's hard to know what Durant wants. So I just get frustrated when the people do have the take of like, oh, fuck Durant, this is Curry's team, and Curry was the better player. But I'm like, this is Warriors fans, you had something special, and next season, if Durant leaves, it's going to be worse, at least in terms of winning, for Durant and for the Warriors than together. And I can't fault Durant, whatever he wants to do. As I mentioned, his jersey's retired. Like if I was who's Lacob and who's the other owner?
Yeah, Lacob and Goober. And yeah, you're right. If Durant leaves, it's definitely because basketball is not the most important thing to him, which isn't the wrong choice necessarily.
Winning basketball. I mean, he might want to play on a team or might want to play with someone else. There's some, playing with someone you want to play with. It could be something like that.
It's been reported he doesn't want to play for Steve Kerr. So there you go.
And I mean, and it's also, it can be hard. One of the things that I recall is the press in college. I don't know if it's true in the NBA, but the press in college is a really tough defense. And anytime you're trying to get people to buy into playing a tough style,
right,
it can be difficult. And so if you have people that you're like, this is the best way for you to win, and you go, yeah, but it's really hard, and I'm 30, and fuck it, and I already have my rings, I don't care. It's really hard to try and tell people to do that. But I just want you were better together than apart. And if I'm the owners of the Warriors, Durant's jersey is retired the second he retires. Because, I mean, I guess there's always a possibility he comes back, right? But it's like there should be no hard feelings. This was an amazing run for the Warriors. And that is also just a testament to how amazing this Warriors team was before Durant and then to get him after. All right, let's talk some Milwaukee, Toronto. I want to just get this out there. This was good news. I texted this to a friend, and I'm glad I was right. So Ty Willinghams, who has agreed, by the way, so this looks like it's a foregone conclusion. I'm going to jinx this ahead of time, Brian, because I don't believe in curses or luck or all that. Ty Willinghams, who is one of the prolific bloggers pre-Wages of Wins and Boxscore Geeks days. So he was an amazing analytics blogger who has since really quit blogging. He said he was going to stop blogging about basketball after the lockout, and despite Dave Barry's research to the contrary that says lockouts don't affect attendance, he actually did stop blogging, and then we got all the stupid fucking plus-minus stuff, so we miss you, Ty. Said he'll come on the podcast if the Bucks make the finals, and that looks like a foregone conclusion. But we were texting back and forth about the Bucks last round, and I said, if Malcolm Brogdon comes back and is 80%, they are a shoo-in for the finals. And good news, looking at these numbers for the first 3 games for the Bucks, it looks like Malcolm Brogdon is back. Malcolm Brogdon is playing amazingly, and the Bucks have a 2-1 lead, 2-1 requiring an overtime. I believe double overtime, but requiring an overtime loss for it to even be close. Although right now the Toronto Raptors are up 7 going into the second half with a little bit of time left.
This is in Game 4 they're in now.
This is Game 4, and this is at Toronto. So that is definitely the question of, the idea of first home court to loses the series. The Bucks are doing what they need to. So I think the Bucks do look like they are the favorites to go to the NBA Finals, which we should really hope for. Brogdon's looking great. Giannis, it's interesting. So last game he had a mediocre scoring game, but still put up 20 rebounds because that's what Giannis does. And then, of course, Kawhi is being Kawhi. Although I think he didn't score well the first couple of games. So hard to say. Basically, I think it is fair to look at the Bucks. This should be the Bucks series. We'll have to see what happens. Well, the funny thing is, what I did, although I turned out being right eventually, Brian, right before this series start, I said Brook Lopez was this team's weak spot, right? If we're talking about the matchups, Brook Lopez is the weak spot, and they're really looking out that Marc Gasol looks like he's done. And I think the point to Marc Gasol is he kind of was looking okay initially when he was traded to Toronto, but then as the season went on and then as the playoffs went on, he looks like he's gone down, and that was our point. He's an old player. We don't know how much he can keep it going. But so we were like, Brook Lopez is their weakness, and then, of course, in Game 1, 29 points, 11 rebounds, 4 blocks, the man in Game 1, probably player of the game. And I was like, God damn it. He had to be the key. And at least the last 2 games, he's looked more like himself, meaning he doesn't really get a lot of rebounds, though is scoring from 3.
Yeah, and I kind of feel the same way about the Bucks. I don't know how many of these have been on the show or off the air, but I've pretty much been saying they're going to walk over everyone if they stay healthy, even the Warriors, and that's probably not a popular comment, but they were just much better than the Warriors in the regular season. So if they're much healthier than the Warriors, it might be an easy series, but if everyone's healthy, it'll probably be a really close series. Toronto, like you said, they are the third best team, though, or at least in the top 3 in some order, so they're, that's why they're giving Milwaukee a better series than Portland did. They're doing okay on offense. They're shooting, not too much worse. I was just going to say is they're doing okay on offense, but Milwaukee's dominating possession. You were talking about Giannis's rebounds. So, to be honest, Game 3, the reason why Toronto probably won is Giannis fouled out,
He did foul out.
He fouled out in the fourth quarter, not even towards the end of it, and then they had to play 2 overtimes and the rest of that fourth quarter without him. That's probably why Toronto took that Game 3. So, yeah, we'll see what happens tonight. We're going to watch that right after the show. But
I'll say, right now, you've got OKC Ibaka in the house right now. 5 for 9 from the field, 9 rebounds, and they're only up by 6. And as a reminder, like Game 1, Toronto went into the fourth quarter up by 5, and then Milwaukee just smoked them. So we'll have to see what happens. It should be obvious that I'm kind of starting to check out in the NBA. I will probably be interested in the finals if it does end up being Milwaukee versus Golden State, which, we at least know the Golden State part is happening. We'll just have to see. It does make me sad. I was hoping Jeremy Lin might be more alive, which has not been the case. But I do also say this. I really do hope Kawhi re-signs with the Raptors. I think that would be good. If he goes to the Raptors or the Clippers, that's good for the NBA. So either of those I'd be okay with.
Clippers seems likely to me just because he's from LA. There's been rumors pretty much every year he's been in the league he wants to play at home, and it doesn't seem like he's going to go to the Lakers. So yeah, it looks like the Clippers for him. That'd be great.
All right, let's lift the Game of Thrones wall and actually go to spoiler territory for that, and then let that be our show. So, Brian, I want to give this to you. I want to give it to Aaron Rodgers for saving the season finale for me. Because I was kind of iffy on it. I was like, it's kind of the worst case to be. Because when you have people hate something, it can be good. This is like wrestling parlance, right? If you get hate, that's emotion. If you get love, that's emotion. If you get indifference, it's like kind of a weird spot to be. And that was kind of my take on the season finale. But Aaron Rodgers, when they asked him how he felt about Bran being the eventual king, so spoiler if you didn't see it, Bran sits on the Iron Throne, although the funny thing is the Iron Throne was destroyed in the final episode. So there is no Iron Throne. Arguably the correct answer is no one sits on the Iron Throne, and Bran is propped up as a figurehead in part because they know their argument is kind of going to an electoral college. They're saying we're not going to let people vote. They laughed at that premise. Sam,
my favorite part of the episode by far, Dre, I just want to interrupt you real fast. Sam getting shut down for democracy was great. I love that.
So Sam suggests democracy, they laugh him out, and then basically the nobles of Westeros say, we're going to decide the king, and going forward, that's the new model. So it's kind of we're going to keep the monarchy, but we're going to decide who the monarch is. So that's an interesting place to be. Bran now sits on the new throne, iron or not. But
there's a meme to explain that, by the way. The reason Drogon melted down the throne is because Bran is bringing his own throne.
Ah, yeah, that's a good one. And what I was going to say about that, though, is Aaron Rodgers is saying the same thing a lot of people are saying, which is the way Bran ends up on the throne is, first off, I'll say this about the episode. Benioff and Weiss, the showrunners of the show, their strong suit is not really writing great dialogue or even great scripted shows. I would argue their strength really was adapting George R. R. Martin's work, and they did that fantastically. I put this in the script, and you nodded. I called them like Michael Bay, because Michael Bay is routinely bashed as a bad filmmaker, and that is obviously untrue. He has made some very successful movies, and he is great at action sequences. He has a really good eye for what a visually appealing action sequence is. And the key is, I'm stealing this from Jason Pargin over at Cracked, the key about Michael Bay is when he makes a movie, that's what he chooses to focus on. There are clearly other aspects of the movie that he just does not care as much about. And the right method, we're kind of talking Kevin Durant Curry, is the right thing is you could get like Michael Bay and pair him with someone else, and they could probably make a well-written, well-scripted, well-action movie. Or if Michael Bay gets complete control, you just accept there are other things that are wanting. Benioff and Weiss, they do have amazing strengths. The adaptation of Game of Thrones from book to movie, George R. R. Martin in interviews even said when he was writing it, as someone with a TV background, was like, Game of Thrones was almost a fuck you to television land, saying he'd seen some of his other work adapted and seen other authors' work adapted and realized all of the constraints that come with that. Just meaning when you have to do something for television, it's a much different world, and there might be budgetary constraints, time constraints, etc., where you just don't get what you want. And so he's saying, as an author, I can do whatever I want. So I'm going to write this book with dragons and huge expensive sets and a billion characters, and it's never going to go on TV, right? And somehow Benioff and Weiss turned it into a television show. Amazing work. However, when they have to take George R. R. Martin's skeleton scripts or plot outlines and adapt the writing, the story narratively flowing, as an example, you sent this to me, Brian. We were talking about last episode how Dany's second dragon died, and the scene where that happened. And then there is a now infamous clip. I don't know if it's Benioff or Weiss. I get the two confused. I always see the two sitting on the couch together when they talk.
They kind of have similar personalities too, right?
They look way different, though. So
they do look different.
But one of them is doing a post-scene interview about the episode, and he says, Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet. And then someone shows a clip of the show and goes, the scene right before that happened, literally one of her advisors pointing at the Iron Fleet on the map. So it's, again, just to stress, that has never been their strong point. If you ask George R. R. Martin to write a very complicated set of things, and so for instance, like the Red Wedding is one of the most amazingly scripted, if you watch the chess piece happening, because like as that's going on, as an example, Tywin is getting his butt kicked by Rob, and then like Tywin like sends a note off, and we don't know what's happened, and then we figure out how he's plotting and all that. That all was amazingly well scripted and put together. That's George R. R. Martin's strength. Yeah. That's not Benioff and Weiss's strength. When they signed on for the show, everybody's expectation, including George R. R. Martin's, is that George R. R. Martin was going to be done with the books and was going to be around in more of a capacity to help with the show, because I believe up until that point in the show, he had written, like, I think up until season 3 or 4, he would write like an episode a season. So I think it's funny where it is fine to point at Benioff and Weiss and say they were not really great at some of the writing of these episodes, this last one included. And so the reason I got on that tangent is like the reason this all comes about is Tyrion like gives an explanation, and he says Bran has the best story, he should be on the throne, and all the nobles are like, yeah, that makes sense. And you're like, what the fuck is going on? And that's gotten lampooned. That is horrible dialogue. Narratively doesn't flow that great.
Exactly.
But Benioff and Weiss, that is not their strength, and it's a very Clerks thing. They arguably weren't even supposed to be there, right? They're like, George R. R. Martin, that scene was supposed to be written in a book, and we were supposed to be able to take it and transcribe it and make a great looking scene and not have to worry about it. So actually, it's funny because there's been all of this backlash against the show in the finale, and I'm actually giving some love here, going, these guys are inept at a lot of stuff that people are rightly mad at them about, might be mad at them about, like their portrayal of women, all that stuff. I give it to them, but I'm saying like this is a case where I'm going to give them some love, where I'm like, they did not expect to have to be in the boat where they were scripting that scene.
Yeah, that's true, and I agree with everything you said. And this is what we've been talking about all season, right? I personally have really enjoyed the way the story has gone, even though I see why a lot of people haven't, and love the directors and the shots and the setups and all that, great scenes and everything. But the writing has been weak at times, and that it's led to bad pacing, bad dialogue, and whatnot.
Well, I would argue that the biggest thing this show has going against it this last season, and a lot of people have said it, is pace. And they decided to do it in 6 episodes instead of 10.
That's the thing. And so they could have, if Benioff and Weiss could have stepped back and made other people write it or done more episodes, there's things they could have done, but they're just like, nah, let's just move forward. So it is kind of their fault, even though I agree with what you're saying.
Well, that's the annoying part, is we can say it's their fault, but I've said this about both.
Because HBO wanted 10 episodes this season, right? They did not want 6.
I've said this about both Benioff and Weiss and George R. R. Martin. This is not an easy project to take on. Writing and then tacking on producing the show is not an easy endeavor. And it's always funny. Same thing with Kevin Durant. We're like, why don't you go back and play for a coach you don't want to play with a fan base that doesn't like you?
Exactly.
Their title, and he can go, dude, I'm worth $30 million a year, and I only get to do this for another 5-6 years at my peak level. Maybe I want to go to New York, or maybe I want to go play with a friend. Maybe I want to do that. I think he should go. He should go. Just embrace the heel. That's what I'm saying about Kevin Durant. Embrace the heel. Play with LeBron. That would be the best. That would be the best. That's my vote. Another couple of things about this season finale, Brian. Team Cersei officially died. They gave me no hope, because I said my narrative ending is Cersei being alive, or at least even the threat of her being alive, was a great ending of the show. Right? It seemed very cyclical, right? The Baratheons and the Starks kill off all the, and Lannisters too, kill off all the Targaryens. They hunt them all down, but a couple survive. The Targaryens come back, kill off all the Lannisters and Starks, but then one survives, and then it just goes on and on and on. So I was saying that would be a fun what if scenario. The show definitively, it just has it was like No Dre. It literally had a scene that could have been called No Dre, where Tyrion goes and finds the bodies of Cersei and Jaime, and we are confirmed Team Cersei is no more. And then Jon kills Dany. That's the big spoiler. And then as a result, Jon gets sent to the Black. So all of this, who's going to sit on the throne, Dan or Jon? The answer is neither, and we get to Bran. The reason I'm going to give thank you to Wisconsin great Aaron Rodgers. He gave an interview, because he did guest star on the show, though it's none of the people you think it is, apparently. So and by guest star, I think he was like an extra in the Battle of Winterfell. So Aaron Rodgers was on the show, and they asked him how he liked the ending, and what's funny is he said no, he didn't like the ending, and his argument is the same I've heard everybody else say. That, are you fucking kidding me? Bran gets the throne, and are you fucking kidding me with the reasoning we get in the show of Tyrion saying Bran has the best story? Like, you have a literal like faceless assassin who killed the Night King right there. You have Sansa, who managed to take over Winterfell again. You have all of these other amazing names. Bronn. Aaron Rodgers said that. You were actually getting pissed towards the end because you and I listened to this right before the show, Brian. And like literally Aaron Rodgers was just listing every Game of Thrones character. Although, by the way, shout outs, Aaron Rodgers, true Game of Thrones fan. So
he
did. But what I was going to say is Aaron Rodgers sold me on the finals. Aaron Rodgers, very much like many of the clutch performances where he has saved the Packers at the last minute, made me go, oh, that finals is crafty. Because what he said, and this, by the way, Brian, actually, I realized this too. I have to give credit to you because this was your theory as well. Bran is freaking Kaiser Sose mastermind. Yeah. And that is, I'm going to say that's canon. I'm saying there are a lot in the show over the years. We've done the fan theories, behind the scene theories. What if the waif is really Jaqen, or what if Arya is really the waif? What if it was really Jaqen Hagar? All this stuff, all these great theories. What if this? What if that? And then the show's just like, no. I'm saying the information the show itself has provided to us has basically said Bran is a fucking mastermind genius that planned to get himself on the throne. And let me break this down and cut me off at any point if you want to chime in.
Oh, no, let's go through it, yeah.
I think this was your theory like a year ago, Brian, where you were like, maybe. So, as a reminder, Bran goes beyond the wall to become the Three-Eyed Raven. The former Three-Eyed Raven is a former Targaryen. Three-Eyed Raven is someone who's using old magic, who has the ability to basically view all of Westeros, I believe history and possibly the future. There is time travel stuff involved.
Yeah, he's known as a Green Seer is what they call them, and he's the most powerful of the Green Seers.
Basically, this person who's able to look to the past, possibly look to the future, see all of Westeros, transport his mentality into various other animals and even humans. So this is the most powerful person in Westeros. And so Bran seeks out the greatest, the former one, and is going to take over that role. And then we also have the Night King, and the Night King also is powered by old magic. And the Night King and the Three-Eyed Raven kind of have a contentious, almost Harry Potter Voldemort relationship, right? They're both powered by the old magic. They're both the most powerful, and they're fighting. For instance, the Night King can see the Three-Eyed Raven when the Three-Eyed Raven is looking through time. So there's an amazing thing here. So Bran basically, after he takes over the role of Three-Eyed Raven, has a few conflicts. He has the Night King is still around, and then of course there are all these other viable sources for the throne. So Bran, when he comes back, arguably sets everything in motion such that his enemies destroy the Night King, his enemies destroy each other, and then he is placed as a convenient person to go on the throne. So if we are saying Bran was a secret mastermind that was plotting to put himself on the throne since he became the Three-Eyed Raven, that came to fruition, and Aaron Rodgers, as he was recapping, basically said that. And I was like, oh, wow. I was like, as I mentioned, apathetic about this finale. But now where we're at, I'm like, wow, that was actually a really clever ending that really Bran was Littlefinger all along.
Yeah, and I agree. And again, the way the pacing of the show, who knows what they actually meant. But I took it that same way as Aaron Rodgers, although I was happy about it, whereas he was sad. So let's back up a little bit. We talked about this before. What is the inspiration for Game of Thrones? It's partially an inverse of Lord of the Rings. George R. R. Martin has said this. He said, it ends with the scourging of the Shire. Excuse me, Dre, I'm getting choked up here. It ends with the scourging of the Shire, this political event where people are being petty, not with the destruction of Sauron the Dark Lord, right? Then what is the other inspiration for it? It's a real-life event, the War of the Roses. Instead of having the Starks and the Lannisters, you had the Yorks and the Lancasters in England, now Great Britain. And they fought this decades-long horrible war. And I think even some of the events of Game of Thrones are loosely based on real-life events, right? Like there actually was a red wedding at some point in one of those noble houses in real life. And I don't know if it was part of that war, but anyway, that's the point. So yeah, it's always about just everyone, just people being really bad people, the leaders failing everyone, and the normal people just getting butchered because of it. And there is no redemption. It's not a hero's journey. And everyone's pretty much bad, right? And then putting Bran in kind of at the last minute, even though it was awkward, as being just another bad person that screwed everyone over, I think that's an appropriate ending for the show. Maybe in a utilitarian sense, he'll be a better ruler than Dany or Cersei or Jon, who has a good heart but is a bad leader. Maybe it'll be better for the people that he becomes leader. But the way he did it was really disgusting, right?
And I mean, admittedly, we don't see it, and that's also a thing about how being an author, right? Who you choose to focus on, and what. So I'm saying the reason I love this story is one, it flows narratively, right? We've been you and I have both been asking a lot in this show of like, why aren't more people talking to Bran, or why isn't Bran giving more information, right? Remember when he shows up and Littlefinger gives him the dagger, and Bran kind of like looks at it. It's like at any point Bran could have just gone to Sansa and Arya and been like, yeah, he's the one who tried to kill things and he did all this stuff wrong. I can see it. I can verify it. He's betraying you. But he kind of held back. And then what we're arguing at this point is that there was a really bad book or movie. I think it was based on a book too, actually. But it's called like Paycheck or something with Ben Affleck. And he invents a machine that lets him see in the future. And the premise is he realizes that this machine is destructive. So he has to destroy the machine in the company. And the way he does it is by arranging it such that there is a path that future him will follow. So it makes any sense. Past him, with the aid of the machine, sets in motion a future such that future him will follow a set of paths to destroy this machine, because he's being monitored as he's building this machine, so he can't leave messages or information. And I believe the way it works is his memory is going to get wiped at the end. So it's a future show. So it's like he has been hired to build this machine. His mind's going to be wiped when he's done building this machine. He's being closely monitored, so he can't leave himself anything that's too obvious that would let him know what's going to go on. So he leaves himself like an envelope of 8 things, and each eight things sets him on a path, so he'll go the right method. So as an example, there is a wedding ring that he buys, in theory, because the argument being he's going to propose to his girlfriend. He buys this wedding ring, and then when he pulls it out, there's a thief that runs by and steals the wedding ring, and he chases the thief. Past him is able to ascertain, if I leave you something valuable, this person will steal it. Ergo, in the future, you'll end up here. And so we're saying that's what Bran's strength is that Bran, using his ability, keeps setting in motion things. I want these things to happen. And you compare this, we're not going to do too much spoilers because I still haven't seen Avengers Endgame, or the second one, whatever it's called, Infinity War. I haven't seen either, actually. But Doctor Strange is this time-traveling person, too, who did this, who basically said, I examined 14 million realities, and the only reality we win is where I do these things. And these things might seem counterintuitive to you. And we're saying that's what happened with Bran. All of the reason Bran's been acting weird, and we can't explain his behavior, is because he has been manipulating his opponents to kill the Night King, which he needs to have happen because the Night King's the only one with powers commensurate to him, to kill the people that would have a claim to the throne, including like by having Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen kill Dany, and thus have to take the Black. The Targaryen claim to the throne is gone. By all of the Lannisters dying, including Cersei, the Lannister and Baratheon claim is gone. So all of that happens. And we're arguing he was setting it up that way. And I'm saying that seems canon. And last note, he asks his advisors where the dragon is. And they're like, nobody knows. And he's like, I'll take care of it. So we now have Bran, the most powerful person in Westeros, in the most powerful position, possibly about to get the most powerful asset. And then also don't forget the Three-Eyed Raven via the magic was able to like live forever. So their argument was Bran can't father any children, so he'll just go on and die eventually.
Will he?
We might have an immortal king with a dragon that knows everything in power. I love this ending.
Yeah, and so one of my biggest disappointments was that the Night King didn't get explained more, like what were his motivations and all that, and I still wish we'd had more of that. But this ending does explain the reason to omit that is Bran covered it up, right? He's like, the Bill Barr of, kings, just covering up that Mueller report. He's not letting anyone know. But I mean, maybe the Night King was doing a good thing, killing the Three-Eyed Raven and bringing balance to the world. But no, Bran won, so we don't know what happened.
And what I said is, like I said, there are fan theories that we entertain that I'm like, I'm sorry, no. And, I've said, I'm like, no, that clearly doesn't happen, right? There is no secret part to the waif and Arya. There is nothing more overt than Arya was somehow able to survive being stabbed and drowning and coming back to kill the waif. That is the story. All of the information is in the plot as given for this to be completely viable and it completely tracks. So I love it. And thank you, Aaron Rodgers, thank you, Brian. You two together, you're the Jordan Pippen or Pippen Jordan. Take your pick of this theory, and then me loving the finale even more than I did.
Yeah, and I think this end is appropriate for Martin, right? It's kind of like a nerdy, technocratic end, like, oh, this is the most powerful magician in the world, Bran the Greenseer, so we're just going to put him on the throne to be the leader, right? Like, that's not kind of a narrative thing. It's more like a fan service thing. So I don't know. I thought it was appropriate. I don't know. I've got a lot of random stuff to say. Should I just like go through some bullet points real fast?
Let me get my one last note. Because I want to forget it, and then we'll let you go because you let me talk a ton, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to say, to the point of Benioff and Weiss being subpar writers and not being great at setting things up, I just wrote this down as I was watching the show. So at one point, when Jon's kind of deciding that he needs to kill Dany, he's talking to Arya, and Arya goes, "I know a killer when I see one." So she's talking to Jon about Dany, and I was like, is this really the dialogue you're going to go with? This woman just burned down an entire city with a dragon. We really need a character to go, I think she's a killer. I've got experience in this thing. And you're like, like that scene should end with Jon looking at her going,
maybe he was sarcastic.
Maybe it should have been. But anyway, so I do, just to the point of the like, when you listen to Benioff and Weiss interviews, they are whatever George R. R. Martin is a storyteller in terms of complexity and dialogue, etc. They are the inverse of that, and so you watch the things they get impressed with, amazed with. Like I said, she forgot about the Iron Fleet comment, and so it's like that. It was like one of them wrote that line down and was like, "Yeah, we need Arya the killer to tell him," and no one's like, everybody just saw her kill.
Yeah.
And then the same thing where when Jon is like, "Pieces here," and Tyrion is like, "Is that what you got from that speech?" It's like, did Jon really just say that? Like, and then I saw some great memes of that too, where someone said like, "Jon, pieces here now." Tyrion, is that really what you got from the speech? The ad-lib line, Jon, oh, actually, I wasn't paying attention. What was she saying again? So, all right, let's get to Brian's bins of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, so no, that was so funny, and I feel like Benioff and Weiss kind of felt that too, because so when Dany did the heel turn, right? I said that I thought it was, I saw it coming the whole time, right? I thought it was going to happen, but I thought a lot of people didn't. And so there's a lot of stuff in this last episode that I think tries to cover that, right? She gives a speech to the Dothraki saying, "Remember when I said we were going to burn down all the stone houses and we did it? Let's burn down some more stone houses." Tyrion's speech to Jon about, trying to convince him to murder Daenerys, he kind of goes through all the stuff they did too. So the writers are trying to say, look, we laid this out for you. You should have realized she was going to do the heel turn.
Now, admittedly, like that, I heard some people talk about that. They're like, she, because Tyrion's argument is something like, she killed these people, but they were evil, so it's fine. Every step of the way, she's been the good guy, so it's easy to just convince yourself. And again, to the same point of bad writing, there's a lot of material. She's lost her Dothraki. She's lost one of her dragons. She's lost her lover. People don't love her. All of this stuff, right? There's a lot to be said here. Cersei has control of her throne and is now throwing innocents in front of her. There's a lot to say why she should break. And then, of course, the Kaiser Sose theory we're giving is that Sam and Bran used Sam to basically infiltrate Dany's mind with the fear that Jon was going to take the Iron Throne away from her.
Yep.
Because I've heard some people note that too. There was no need for Jon's lineage to matter. And it matters in the sense that it basically it's like the final straw in Dany's very bad week that knocks her off her game and causes her to feud with Jon. So that's what I've seen that take of. So it's like there's a lot of material for why Dany should go bad, and then she convinced herself she was a good guy, but maybe she's the bad guy. It was like horrible writing, but I agree. There was plenty of material there for her being the heel turn.
Yeah, and I'm not clear if this is what you're saying, but let's find out. I want to state that I think she did not go mad. That the way they said she ended up was she's just a Targaryen, right? A pure Targaryen. She just wants to sit there with her dragons, conquer people, and, marry her nephew. Like, that's just the Targaryen way. And she recognized that by the end. She says, this is who I am. This is how I want to do it. Why don't you guys see that? I don't think she had a mental break, really, despite her looking anguished. So,
unfortunately, unlike the Bran theory, I'm going to say the show doesn't match that, and nor does like the behind the scenes talking. But
I don't know about the behind the scenes.
I would have preferred. I'm just saying, in the last episode and all that. But I'm just going to say I actually prefer that writing. That's going to be mine. So I'm going to admit that it's not correct, unfortunately. But that is actually a much more empowering and not even incorrect one of her just saying, as an example, there is still a very interesting aspect of women versus men in mainstream media and even like elections. I've seen a lot of people point that out. Aspects of Hillary and Elizabeth Warren's characters that are never even touched on in a male. So, I mean, whether or not it's right or wrong, I'm not saying that the characteristic of them is a good or a bad thing. It might even be a bad thing. I might even agree with that. But I'm saying it's something that will never come up in a male politicians in the media coverage of them, right? Just as an example of, they're too war hawkish, all this, like, we're not going to see that. Whereas we'll see that, anyway, sorry. So going back to Game of Thrones, what you're saying about Dany, of her just being like, this is fucking war. Cersei got in my way. This is my right, and this is my lineage, and this is what I'm going to do. And not only that, are you going to tell me I'm wrong? Are you going to tell me that I'm wrong to liberate all the people that have been getting oppressed by these nobles and having them kill? Before I showed up, you can't say that they weren't having these people kill each other off before I showed up, right? Like, I killed the Night King. I'm doing this, and I'm saying unfortunately the show didn't go this way, but that would be a great thing. I'm in full agency of this. It is my right to take who I want, to take a relative as my, as the person to follow me on the throne. I'm going to burn down the stone houses like I said I was. I'm going to free the people. That is what I'm supposed to do. A few episodes, and it's Cersei's. She says this in this episode, right? Cersei's the one who decided to put the innocent people in front of me. It's not on me. I did what had to be done. That's what she's arguing. A few episodes ago, Jaime Lannister, when he's on trial in front of Dany, and they're like, "You've done war crimes," and he's like, "We were at war." He's like,
"Right?
Yeah, I killed your people. Yeah, I killed your dad. Yeah, I did all these things. We're at war. Deal with it." Nobody's saying that like. Clearly Jaime lost his mind, even though arguably Jaime had like a mental break and ran back to Cersei. So I like your take more, even if it's not what's portrayed. And with how a lot of women are portrayed in media, including Game of Thrones, I would have preferred it.
Yeah, and maybe I'll have to rewatch it. I don't know, but I hope there's some room for that to be true. Yeah, okay, so just more random stuff I'll get through. Jon just kind of ended up being the ultimate tool, right? Like, Tyrion used him, and Jon's like, fine, I'll do it, and go to Castle Black. Sansa sold out Jon too, and Jon forgave her. That was kind of an interesting scene. So, yeah, poor Jon, I guess. People weren't happy necessarily about Grey Worm's ending. So with the bigger point that, yes, like the Unsullied and the Dothraki, being the people of color and kind of their stories not mattering in the end and them getting used as pawns, that's a super accurate complaint that, I think I can agree with. But as far as Grey Worm himself, like, I kind of like his ending. He ends up just being kind of an authoritarian asshole and, but he's his own guy, right? And he goes away and does his own thing. And he doesn't have to be a good guy, I think. He doesn't have to be redeemed either. So I was okay with that. It was good to have some more cameos come back. Another great Uncle Edmer scene. I did not see that coming.
Recognize the I'm forgetting his name, but the breastfeeding boy, John.
Yes, Robin Aaron, who was grown, and yeah, that was another great meme. That after seeing Tormund and Robin Aaron both being so huge, clearly breastfeeding is the way to go. It's great for your babies. Bran also just completely used Jon, and one of the most brutal lines in that whole last episode was Bran said to Jon, "You were exactly where you were supposed to be." You remember that line? Jeez. So, yeah, he totally set Jon up.
Theon too.
Like he said something very similar to Theon.
It's funny because I said that like jokingly, like when Theon died, my take was I was like, what if he wasn't thanking Theon for his service? He was like, "You betrayed me, go to hell." And that was my take about Theon's end, because he could have even said to Theon, like, "Hey, we just need to stall him for like 30 seconds. Arya's about to kill him," or just if he didn't want to give it away, he'd be like, "Just wait, you'll see," or whatever. But I argued he wanted Theon dead, and so the theory of Bran just being this ultimate mover and shaker who is mowing down his enemies, same thing freaking happened like with Jaime. And with Jaime, right, he was like, "Why didn't you say anything?" And he just said, like, I needed whatever, right? Jaime goes back and gets Cersei, and Cersei and him, right, go into the crypts and die, or not the crypts, the tunnels, and die. Mm-hmm. It's like maybe he's like, if I sell you out, you die, and Cersei escapes. So I love this take of Bran just using everybody, and as you mentioned, of all the people he used, Jon is the ultimate tool.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, just to finish up so we don't go too long here, I think I said this in the pre-show, this ending to me was sort of like The Wire, that everyone the system just grinds everyone down, but life goes on, and they end with the small council, right, the new small council bickering with each other. That made me think back again to that Scourging of the Shire ending, that that's just how life goes on. Yep,
things keep going, and then you have to, and then that was, like I said, the amusing part is that they basically ignore the super powerful magician who just said he's looking for a dragon. They ignore him, leave the thing, and I tweeted about that. They ignore him, leave to bicker about if they should open brothels or like rebuild aqueducts first. So
it's kind of a sinister ending, but still life goes on.
That has been Game of Thrones, right? The White Walkers are coming. And we're sitting here going like, well, the Lannisters and Starks really need to decide who owns what or who owns here, or all these other people that even know it, like Varys and Littlefinger, know this stuff, and they're like, let's play the Game of Thrones. So I think that was a very fitting ending. And as I mentioned, you and Aaron Rodgers, with what is canon, have sold me on it. So I was fine with season 8. I'll agree with the one complaint. It was paced too heavily. Yeah. I want to get one last meta thing, Brian, and I can end us on just as a thing that pisses me off. So not really a shout out, an anti-shout out, or a fuck that guy. Something that's gotten really famous this last week is this petition to redo season 8. And I'm actually annoyed for a different reason. I've seen a lot of the actors come out and say that's very disrespectful to ask it. A bigger take that I can agree with, just to give my 2 cents, and we've said this about the Boxscore Geeks, is even if you're a fan of something, you don't own it, and entitled fans are obnoxious. If you like Rick and Morty, that's great. It is not your show. It is not your place to gatekeep who likes it. It is not your place to yell at the creators if you're unhappy at what they do. It is not your place to believe that if the creator does something you don't want, you should be allowed to do what you want with it. George R. R. Martin, for what it's worth, is someone who dislikes fan fiction, saying, if I made the property, you don't get to write with those characters. Those are my characters. I would agree with the caveat of, like, we should have respected the copyright law of, after 50 years it goes public domain. So, Game of Thrones would go public domain before George R. R. Martin finishes it, but regardless, that would be my take. What pissed me off about this petition was when I first saw this as a story, it had 16,000 signatures. It's gotten up to 500,000. It got that high because a bunch of media outlets were going, can you believe these entitled fans? Can you believe these entitled fans? Can you believe these entitled fans? And it was very much the wag the dog scenario that we have seen about the media, especially with millennial things, and it pisses me off. When the media comes out and goes, can you believe people are upset about this? And they blast it on a megaphone. And then they're like, oh my goodness, can you believe these people are upset about this? They are upset about it, or it has information because the media has given it a voice. And the same thing, I made this observation when it was new. Even now, even if that petition gets 1 million signatures, Game of Thrones, the season finale, had 43 million views. That is absurd. 43 million. 1 million signatures is still a drop in the bucket compared to that. And when it was 16,000, I was like, this is nothing. I'm like, this is a rounding error of the fans that watched that finale. So the fact of the matter is the media chose to find this basically small group of people that were upset, give them a very, very big voice, and as a result, that voice got bigger and bigger and bigger than it would have if they ignored it. And, that is essentially what happened with, the Trump presidency, etc. So I'm still very annoyed when this kind of shit happens, where the media will find something that doesn't matter, give it a huge voice, and it grows out of control. Although, to be fair, if I want to be myself, this has been a problem with media since the beginning of media. But it's
and social media is not helping that now that it's around. That, the algorithms are causing just as many this is what we like to say, right? Algorithms are just as biased as the people who write them, basically, right? So
what freaking bugs me about the argument of an unbiased algorithm, the whole point of an algorithm is it's something that says I'm going to exhibit bias on a set of data you give me based on what you've told me.
The purpose of it, right?
It's an algorithm by definition is biased, so you should say, are the biases correct or that's the more I always get upset with that. Same with news, Brian. I always get upset with the argument we want unbiased. What I want, and I'm okay with, is if you have a bias, is it a justified bias?
Transparency about that bias.
And transparency about the bias as well. I am explicitly trying to do blah. Here is why that's okay. I'm okay with that, as opposed to I'm an unbiased news source, which is why every time I talk about Trump, I'm going to give a Trump voter in Michigan, a camera and a bunch of words.
Man on the street interviews kill me, Dre. It's always the most bland question and answer that means nothing at all. I don't like them.
And also, man on the street interviews, something key to remember about those is the person who gets interviewed has to agree. So if you go up to someone who says something and they're like, I don't like what I said there, I don't want to be on camera, they don't. So it's a very self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yep.
All right. We are not going to get resolution on the Milwaukee game, but they are within 7. The Milwaukee Bucks are down by 7, so we will see. We will see what happens as this game goes on. We'll talk about it next week regardless, and then, of course, we'll have more draft to talk about. I'll let you give the last thought, Brian, and then I'll lead us out.
No, looking forward to the finals. If it is Bucks versus Warriors, that'll be epic. But yeah, like you said, this series is far from over. It may end up being 2-2. So yeah, we'll probably have a lot more Eastern Conference Finals to talk about next week.
Well, it's all we're going to be able to talk about. It's the only
Yeah.
basketball. Anyway, I've been your host, Ray Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Boxscore Brian. This is the Boxscore Geeks Show. You can find us at boxscoregeeks.com if you didn't find us through the website. We go live every week, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers, usually Monday, sometimes Tuesday if there's a basketball game on. And if you missed the live show, you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. We also have an iTunes Stitcher show, the Boxscore Geeks podcast, so look for the Boxscore Geeks Show there. Subscribe, upvote, helps us out. Figure that's been long enough, Brian. We'll see you next time.